As always, thank you for watching and thank you for joining me on my show. Yes, I am aware that there are some issues with the stream dropping early. I apologize about that. The Jump King stream that I had earlier today was cut short earlier, and you didn't miss much. I got back to Bargainburg, but yeah, sorry about that. For the format for today's reading series, we'll have War and Peace and Sapiens as usual. I thought that it would also make sense for me to review some of the Spark Notes information on the information that we've already covered, to provide both a recap and some context for some of the information we've already covered, somewhat of a recap, if you will. And yes, we will also have Sapiens, Peace in Our Time. I think that we're making great progress with this reading series. These dang moths. They always get in somehow. We're making great progress with these reading series. And yeah, exercise and fitness streams. I think I will have one tomorrow. I believe it would make sense for it to follow the reading series. So predict one perhaps late afternoon tomorrow, about 4 or 5 Mountain Time. Okie dokie. Without further ado, let's dive into the reading for today. Peace in Our Time. We'll start with Sapiens for today. I gotta rack my brain to provide quality commentary. That's probably my biggest challenge with reading Sapiens. And I'll do what I can. If nothing else, provide a reaction to what Yuval's discussing and potentially discuss it further if I can think of things to say about the topic. Okay. As a reminder, last time in Sapiens, he discussed some of the violent episodes in the past, as well as periods of peace. Okay. Most people don't appreciate just how peaceful an era we live in. None of us was alive 1,000 years ago, so we easily forget how much more violent the world used to be. As wars become more rare, they attract more attention. I guess that's always the case. It's like, the less common something is, the more it's like scarcity. Scarcity breeds fondness, just as familiarity does. Yeah, rare things have that effect too. It's like, if something's hard to get, it's more valuable in a way, or at least better at attracting attention. Okay. Alright, thank you, idea. Yeah, any chat that you have that's on topic with the reading, I appreciate you adding something to the conversation. Okay. Many more people think about the wars raging today in Afghanistan and Iraq than about the peace in which most Brazilians and Indians live. Yeah, and it's like, violence, like, it's more exciting in a way. It's more entertaining that's the reason why people would rather pay to see like a UFC fight maybe than a reading similar to this one, but it is what it is. Yeah, kind of lamentable the fact that evil's posited here, but I think it's rooted in human nature. Even more importantly, it's easier to relate to the suffering of individuals than of entire populations. However, in order to understand macro historical processes, we need to examine mass statistics rather than individual stories. In the year 2000, wars caused the deaths of 310,000 individuals, and violent crime killed another 520,000. Each and every victim is a world destroyed, a family ruined, friends and relatives scarred for life. Yet from a macro perspective, these 830,000 victims comprised only 1.5% of the 56 million people who died in 2000. That year, 1.26 million people died in car accidents, which is 2.25% of total mortality, and 815,000 people committed suicide, which is 1.45% of the total. I guess the relative majority of those is related to health crises and conditions, from what I recall. Figures for 2002 were even more surprising. Out of 57 million dead, only 172,000 people died in war, and 569,000 died of violent crime, a total of 741,000 victims of human violence. Yeah, so Yuval's discussing here how, compared to the total violent deaths, compose only a small fraction of the total. In contrast, 873,000 people committed suicide. This is in the year 2002. So more died of suicide than human violence in the year 2002 alone. It turns out that in the year following the 9/11 attacks, despite all of our talk of terrorism and war, the average person was more likely to kill himself than to be killed by a terrorist, a soldier, or a drug dealer. Very astute observation on Yuval's part. And yeah, I think that to this day there's still a stigma around mental health and suicide in general, and because of that it gets swept under the rug a lot. People don't like talking about it because it scares them, frankly. In most parts of the world, people go to sleep without fearing that in the middle of the night a neighboring tribe might surround their village and slaughter everybody. Well-off British subjects, yeah, I didn't have anything to add to that. Well-off British subjects travel daily from Nottingham to London through Sherwood Forest without fear that a gang of merry green-clad brigands will ambush them and take their money to give to the poor, or more likely murder them and take the money for themselves. Students brook no canings from their teachers. Children need not fear that they will be sold into slavery when their parents can't pay their bills. And women know that the law forbids their husbands from beating them and forcing them to stay at home. Increasingly around the world, these expectations are fulfilled. It's like most people enjoy the benefits of order, stability, and civility, is what this is saying. The decline of violence is due largely to the rise of the state. Throughout history, most violence resulted from local feuds between families and communities. Even today, as the above figures indicate, local crime is far deadlier threat than international wars. As we have seen, early farmers who knew no political organizations larger than the local community suffered rampant violence. As kingdoms and empires became stronger, they reigned in communities and the level of violence decreased. In the decentralized kingdoms of medieval Europe, about 20 to 40 people were murdered each year for every 100,000 inhabitants. In the recent decades, when states and markets have become more powerful and communities have vanished, violence rates have dropped even further. I believe the reason for that is because there's more law enforcement. I would say so, just better law enforcement. As a result of there being increased power on the state level. Today, the global average is only 9 murders per year per 100,000 people. And most of these murders take place in weak states such as Somalia and Colombia. In the centralized states of Europe, the average is 1 murder a year per 100,000 people. Yeah, centralization. You all said it. I think that's the key. It's like once power is centralized, it becomes easier to control what goes on in the community. There's certainly cases where states use their power to kill their own citizens, and these often loom large in our memories and fears. During the 20th century, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people were killed by the security forces of their own states. Still, from a macro perspective, state-run courts and police forces have probably increased the level of security worldwide. Even in oppressive dictatorships, the average modern person is far less likely to die at the hands of another person than in pre-modern societies. In 1964, a military dictatorship was established in Brazil. It ruled the country until 1985. During these 20 years, several thousand Brazilians were murdered by the regime. Thousands more were imprisoned and tortured. Yet even in the worst years, the average Brazilian in Rio de Janeiro was far less likely to die at human hands than the average Guarani, Arauti, or Yanomamo are. Those are indigenous people who live in the depths of the Amazon forest, without army, police, or prisons. Anthropological studies have indicated that between a quarter and half of their menfolk die sooner or later in violent conflicts over property, women, or prestige. Yeah, some things never change. Sometimes I have to review what I'm reading in these texts to ensure that I've fully understood not just what was stated, but the implications of what was stated. Yeah, regimes certainly can be the major downside of that increased power in the state. It's like he's saying, it's like Yuval saying that with strong states, the ideal is free, democratic, orderly society. Those societies carry with them the least likelihood that people will die. Following that, of course, are regimes where like thousands of people are wiped out. Even worse are people who are living in so-called tribes outside of the influence of society. Which makes sense. It's a pretty good recap on his part. Okie dokie. let's take a look at War and Peace. I'll do the recap before we dive into chapter 20, so that way everything's making a little bit more sense. Alright, book 1. Here's the recap for the first 3 chapters. Yeah, it might take me a while to get through it, but I'll get through it as quick as I can. I warn you, if you still try to defend the infamies and horrors perpetrated by that Antichrist, I really believe he is the Antichrist. I will have nothing to do with you. Nothing more to do with you, sorry. And that was a quote from the first book, as we would recall. Okay, let's see what's... And all this information I'm taking right now is off of sparknotes.com. As a recap, I can also take a look at the character descriptions, particularly if I think they'll be helpful in helping us contextualize some of these characters. As I've remarked, it's a little bit hard for me with my background to understand the significance of some of the Russian, what do they call them? Russian nobility. It's hard for me to know, like, who's significant for what reason. And oftentimes I get confused about the roles of different characters. As I've said, Pierre's the one that really stands out in my memory because he's depicted outside of the Russian norm. Like all these people are Russians, and they're related, and that makes it a little bit harder for me to know, like, like who's important and why. But Pierre, it's like he studied somewhere else, and when Leo's describing Pierre in the book, it's like he's just a little bit different, and because of that he stands out more than the other characters. Like I remember Pierre, he's the one that played the prank with the cop and the bear, like forced the bear to dance with the cop. Like, and that's like just a one case in point example of how and why Pierre stands out relative to the other characters in War and Peace. Like, he's just always stood out a little bit more because of that. Okay, but here's the recap. And these are for the first 3 chapters, aka book 1. At a society party in St. Petersburg in 1805. St. Petersburg is a major city in Russia. If I'm not mistaken, it was the capital. Let me see when that was, though. Because it shifted, the capital of Russia shifted from St. Petersburg to Moscow at some point in time. Let me see if I can quickly find that information. Formerly known as Petrograd, from 1914 to 1924. So this was prior to then. The events in this story were prior to when it was known as Petrograd and Leningrad. It is the second largest city in Russia. It was founded by Peter the Great on the 27th of May, 1703, on the site of a captured Swedish fortress, and was named after Apostle St. Peter. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, here's where it says it. It served as the capital of the Tsardom of Russia and the subsequent Russian Empire from 1713 to 1918, being replaced by Moscow for a short period of time, and this is from the Wikipedia page, by the way. Being replaced by Moscow for a short period of time between 1728 and 1730, which sounds about right. After the October Revolution in 1917, the Bolsheviks moved their government to Moscow. So for the for this time period, St. Petersburg was considered the capital city of Russia. And to this day, it's still known as the cultural capital. St. Petersburg itself is historically and culturally associated with the birth of the Russian Empire and Russia's entry into history as a European great power. Quoted from the Wikipedia page. Okay. I've never been, but maybe someday I could go to St. Petersburg. Okie. So at a society party in St. Petersburg in 1805, and here I'm quoting from the Spark Notes page of War and Peace, Section 1, Book 1, Anna Pavlovna Scherer speaks to her old friend Prince Vasily Kuragin about the threat Napoleon presents to Russia. So this is on the eve of the Napoleonic Wars. Anna, calling Napoleon the Antichrist, declares that Russia alone must save Europe. And as we later find out, Britain also plays a role as well, I would say. The prospect of war dominates the conversations at the party. But Anna also raises more personal issues, expressing esteem for Vasily's children, especially the beautiful Helene, with the exception of Anatole, a rogue. Vasily asks Anna to arrange a meeting between his son Anatole and Mary Bolkonskaya, the lonely daughter of Prince Bolkonsky, a rich, reclusive, retired military commander. Yeah, I'd say this is probably the reason why I get confused about some of the characters, because so many characters are introduced. It's like who does what now? Yes. It might help me to put together somewhat of a family tree or something like that. Yeah, so Vasily's children are Helene, the beautiful, and Anatole, the rogue. Prince Bolkonsky. He's the military commander. And this is all in chapter 1. Meanwhile, Helene Kuragina arrives at the party, as does Lise, Bolkonsky's daughter-in-law, who's married to his military officer son, Andrew. Next to arrive is Pierre, the unpolished and ungainly son of Count Bezukov, educated abroad and only recently returned to Russia. The ugly Hippolyte Kuragin, Helene's brother, is also present. So it's like she got the looks, he got the pain. Pierre watched Andrew with glad, affectionate eyes. Andrew frowned again, expressing his annoyance with whoever was touching his arm. Okay, yeah, and now Andrew's being introduced. Andrew Bolkonsky arrives at the party. Vasily Kuragin promises a promotion of Boris, the only son of a well-connected but impoverished, aka poor, old acquaintance. Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drubetskaya. She's the acquaintance of Prince Vasily. Prince Vasily is able to use his political position to the advantage of Boris, her son. Sheesh, Leo. Sheesh. Pierre voices approval of the French Revolution. After the soiree, Pierre visits Andrew at his house, where they discuss the idea of perpetual peace advanced by one of Anna's guests. Pierre believes in this possibility of peace, but he thinks that such peace must be spiritual rather than political. Andrew advises Pierre not to marry, saying that marriage wastes a man's sense of purpose and resolve. The same resolve demonstrated by Napoleon. It's like, don't marry yourself to a woman, you will make yourself weak. Yeah, perpetual peace. It might have sounded good to Russia back then, but yeah, she's been in many wars since then. Yeah, quite a few. The Napoleonic Wars, both World Wars, the Cold War, not to mention conflicts in Europe, of course. Like the invasion of Afghanistan, as an example. Later, Pierre visits his friend Anatole at his house near the barracks, where the drunken officers are carousing with a trained bear. And Anatole's friend Dolokhov is proving that he can drink a bottle of rum while precariously perched on the window ledge. That's a little bit easier for me to remember too because it's action oriented. It's like, I remember Dolokhov being the guy that was in the bed. He was the one that was in the bed. Okay, continuation of book 1. This is for chapters 4 through 13. This black-eyed, wide-mouthed girl, not pretty but full of life, ran to hide her flushed face in the lace of her mother's mantilla, not paying the least attention to her severe remark, and began to laugh. The Spark Notes may have additional explanation on these quotes. Before we dive into the next series, I need to use the bathroom. I'll be right back. That was the recap of the first 3 chapters. So we've already been introduced to, I think, something like a dozen different characters. Just in the first 3 chapters. It's like, dang. Dang, Leo. We're back. Okay, I'm back. Alright, Alright, there we go. Just as a quick recap, because it does kind of get a little bit confusing, but with the whirlwind of information we're presented with. We've already been introduced, let me count them off, to Anna Pavlovna Scherer, Prince Vasily Kuragin, the prince's children, Prince Vasily's children, Helene and Anatole, Mary Bolkonskaya, Prince Bolkonsky, so that's already 6. Helene Kuragina, oh oops, sorry, I already counted Helene, I already counted Helene, so we're still at 6. There's Lise, Bolkonsky's daughter-in-law, and Andrew, her spouse. Wait. Yeah, Andrew, her spouse. So that's 8. Then there's Pierre. He's 9. His father, the Count Bezukov, that's 10. Hippolyte Kurgan, which is... Has he already been introduced? I don't think so. Yeah, Hippolyte would be 11. And here it's explained that Hippolyte is also Helene's brother, which means Helene has 2 brothers. Hippolyte, the ugly one, and Anatole, the rogue, the hooligan. So yeah, almost 12, almost a dozen different characters have already been introduced. There's Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drubetsky. That would be 12 right there. And lastly, Dolokhov. So yeah, over a dozen different characters have been introduced in just the first 3 chapters of the book. 13 total. That's why it's easy to lose track. Anna Mikhailovna, and this is starting in chapter 4. Anna Mikhailovna has gone to Moscow, to the home of her wealthy relatives, the Rostovs. Both the Rostov mother and the youngest daughter are celebrating their name day, the feast day of the Christian saint after whom the women are named. The guests discuss Pierre's uncouth lifestyle. Again, like he's a little bit different, and for that reason he stands out. And we're introduced to the Rostovs now. In Sapiens, Yuval draws a parallel between the nature of the saints and polytheistic beliefs. It's like whereas people used to believe in the Egyptian gods like Ra and Osiris, and the Greek gods like Zeus and Hera, over time Christians started believing in saints instead. Their beliefs transferred into those. And the saints got their own, like, holidays. We still celebrate Christmas. St. Patrick's Day is another good example. The 13-year-old Rostov daughter, Natasha, appears carrying her doll. She's accompanied by other children, including her brother Nicholas, his friend Boris, Anna Mikhailovna's son, and Sonia, Count Rostov's niece, all of whom live in the Rostov household. Nicholas states that he's joining the army out of a sense of vocation rather than a wish to accompany Boris, who's been made an officer. Nicholas and Boris, okay, the other friends. Natasha mischievously hides in order to watch a tearful exchange between Nicholas and Sonia. It's just interesting to see how these characters are connected. Like, Natasha's the daughter of the Rostovs. Her brother is Nicholas. He is there's Nicholas. Sonia is married to Nicholas. She is herself Count Rostov's niece, though. So that seems like it's kind of like cousins marrying cousins. I guess they did that kind of thing back then to keep power in the family. That was a pretty common thing to do. It's like, yeah, you just marry your brother so that way the poor folk don't mess everything up. It's actually pretty messed up if you think about it. There's a lot of like genetic defects because of that in royal families. Yeah, pretty sad actually. All around. Anna Mikhailovna's son is Boris. Boris is an officer in the army. Natasha's Count Rostov's daughter. She's hiding. There's an exchange between Nicholas and Sonia in which Nicholas begs forgiveness for flirting with Julie Karagina, one of the guests. When Boris appears, Natasha sees a kiss from him. Natasha seeks a kiss from him and extracts a half-joking promise of marriage in 4 years. Countess Rostova makes her daughter Vera leave the room. So there's, yeah, the Count and Countess Rostov have a daughter Natasha, a daughter Vera, and a son Nicholas. Countess Rostova makes her daughter Vera leave the room so that she and Anna Mikhailovna may discuss financial worries. Anna Mikhailovna hopes that Boris's godfather, the alien Count Cyril Bezukov, will help Boris. And that's Count Bezukov. Is this our first time seeing him in the story? I think he was already mentioned. I might be wrong about that. It sounds familiar though. Yes, Count Bezukov has already been introduced as the father of Pierre. So we also find out that he's rich. Or at least has the means of helping Boris. Boris is the son of Anna Mikhailovna. Okay, and that... where are we? Okay, yeah, we're almost at chapter 14. This is all the recap. Anna Mikhailovna and Boris visit his dying godfather, Cyril Bezukov. They are greeted by Vasily Kuragin, who, due to Pierre's illegitimacy, is the current heir to the Bezukov fortune. Is this Count Vasily? I assume so. Sorry, not Count Vasily. It's the Prince. Yeah. Sorry, the Prince Vasily. Guess this is him. Yeah, they're greeted by Vasily Kuragin, who, due to Pierre's illegitimacy, is the current heir to the Bezukov fortune. Vasily fears that Anna Mikhailovna will be a rival fortune seeker. What relation is Prince Vasily to Pierre, though? It's not immediately clear to me what their relationship is. Are they like half brothers, step brothers? And if Prince Vasily is if he's the heir, if he's the son of Count Bezikov, then shouldn't that mean that he has the right to that fortune over Anna Mikhailovna and Boris, seeing as how he's part of the bloodline? I would think that's the case. But I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing. She's the godfather. Yeah, Count Bezikov is the godfather after all. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Boris goes upstairs to see Pierre, who has been expelled from St. Petersburg for riotous conduct. Yeah, Boris does. And the two men discuss their lives and financial situations. Meanwhile, Countess Rostova asks her husband for money for Boris's military uniform. I guess the House Rostov doesn't have the same means as the Bezukovs, just based on what I'm reading here. The Rostovs entertained dinner guests, including Officer Berg. Again, just so many characters. Yeah, they entertained dinner guests, including Officer Berg and a woman, Maria Dmitrievna Akrosimova, known for her bluntness. Maria Dmitrievna gives a name day present to Natasha, who is one of the very few people not afraid of Maria. I think we've all known a woman like that. Pushy, bossy, control maniac. Yes, they can be very headstrong and overbearing, I guess. That's how I would describe them. Mary is not Natasha's the one that's not afraid of her. Over dinner, the idealistic Nicholas blurts out that Russia must conquer or die. Again, I think Britain has a much bigger role here than they've talked about yet. After dinner, Natasha seeks out Sonia to join the guests for music and finds Sonia crying from despair that her love for her cousin Nicholas will never be sanctified with marriage. Natasha reassures Sonia. Again, marrying cousins, what the heck? I wonder why she thinks that. Let me see if I can go back a page. Natasha, is she the one that's worried, or is Sonia? I think Sonia's the one that's worried. Yeah, Sonia's the one that's worried. Have we been given any indication of why? Maybe because he's going away to the army. Yeah, that's the only... That's the only clue I have, is that he's joined the army and that's why they're not getting married. Meanwhile, Count Bezikov has had a 6th stroke with no hope of recovery. Vasily Kuragin. informs another potential heir, the Princess Catherine Semenovna, that the Count has written a letter asking the Tsar to legitimize his bastard son Pierre, making him full and direct heir to his large fortune. Man, what a web. Yeah, the Princess Catherine Semenovna asks the Tsar to legitimize Pierre to make him the heir. Princess Catherine. Based on what it says here, she's the sister of Prince Vasily. Although why Leo's waited until now to introduce her is beyond me. Like, again, just massive family. Completely massive. And again, Pierre is technically their brother. He's just their illegitimate brother. Because the mom is... I guess we don't know who the mom is. Vasily and Catherine try to destroy the letter, but Anna Mikhailovna prevents them. Who wrote the letter, though? Oh, the Count Bezukov did. Wait, what? It's interesting. It's like, so I guess Count Bezukov is most fond of his son Pierre based on what I'm seeing here. Because it's the Count who's written this letter asking for his son to be legitimized over Prince Vasily and Princess Catherine. But Anna Mikhailovna prevents them. Okay, so Anna Mikhailovna is Pierre's mom. Yeah, okay, so some of this is starting to make sense. Pierre shyly visits his father's room and sees the dying man, but leaves when his father dozes. The Count dies. And that is at the end of chapter 13. Okay, chapters 14 through 16 in book 1. At Bald Hills, At Bald Hills, Prince Nicholas Bolkonsky's estate outside Moscow. Yeah, Prince Nicholas Bolkonsky. The prince lives in seclusion with his daughter Mary and her companion Mademoiselle Dorian. Again, yeah, massive family. After a difficult geometry lesson, Mary reads a letter from her friend Julie Karagina, who misses Mary and is sad that Nicholas Rostov has left to join the war. So we've been introduced to two Nicholases now. Prince Nicholas Bolkonsky and Prince Nicholas Rostov. Prince Nicholas Rostov is the one who's the officer in the army. Nicholas Bolkonsky's the recluse. Mary's reading a letter from her friend Julie Karagina, who misses Mary. Julie also informs Mary of Pierre's inheritance. Mary writes back, counseling Julie to remember Christian patience and forgiveness. Mary's brother, Andrew Bolkonsky, arrives at Bald Hills with his wife, Lise. Andrew tells Mary that he will be leaving for the war soon. So Andrew and Nicholas are both going to the war. Over dinner, the family and a guest, Michael Ivanovich, discuss the war. The old Prince Bolkonsky is contemptuous of Napoleon, while Andrew asserts the French Emperor's grandeur. Kind of ironic because Russia was opposed to Russia was opposed to the French at the time. Mary's astonished at her brother's failure to revere their father. It just makes me wonder, it's like, Andrew's, in saying that Napoleon's rat, he's like not pledging himself to Russia, is what I'm understanding from this. She's astonished at her brother's failure to revere their father and finds him much changed. Andrew admits to his father and his sister that he is unhappy in his marriage to Lise. Princess Nicholas sends his son off to war with a letter to General Kulazov requesting favors for Andrew. Andrew bids farewell to his family and leaves. Prince Nicholas's son, is that Andrew? I guess so. Prince Nicholas Bolkonsky. Yeah, so it looks like chapters 14 through 16 focus on the Bolkonskys. Yeah, Nicholas Bolkonsky, his daughter Mary, and his son Andrew. I see, okay, this is making sense. So Prince Bolkonsky is critical of Napoleon. I think that bit was something, but it's fine. Yeah, Prince Bolkonsky is fond of Napoleon. Prince Bolkonsky is critical of Napoleon, and his son Andrew thinks Napoleon is cool. He's like, nah, Napoleon's great. You don't even know. You don't even know, Dad. And that was book 1. Alrighty, hold on a second. Alright, I'll quickly read through the analysis, and to conclude today we'll read chapter 20. Tolstoy introduces us to the deep and complex relationship between the two words of his novel's title, War and Peace, in the opening scene at Anna Pavlovna's party. You see immediately that even the seemingly peacetime activity of partying is actually quite warlike. I can see this evident from the way that they are all kind of competing in a way for Count Bezukov's fortune. It's like become a rat race. It's like, the money's mine. No, it's mine. You see immediately that, even the party itself is quite warlike. Anna runs her soiree with a precise strategy, much like a general, knowing exactly when to attack and when to withdraw. Her words to Vasily are described as an attack, and Vasily calls himself her slave. That's Anna Mikhailovna, not Anna Mikhailovna, that's Anna Pavlovna's that we're talking about. Though these phrases may be only metaphors, they nonetheless refer to a power structure in Russian high society that is as steely and directed as a war machine. Indeed, we soon see how much strategy Vasily uses to secure fortunes for his shiftless children Anatole and Helene, and how Helene herself is a ruthless gold digger behind her marble beauty. it's like House of Cards or something like that. Like everyone's trying to use their position for advantage. It's clear that the people in the Society of War and Peace are on the attack, out for conquest. Moreover, we sense that those characters who are too naive to recognize this warlike dynamic, as Pierre soon proves to be, will be defeated and plundered. Maria Dmitrievna even describes little Natasha as a Cossack warrior, using an admiring tone that suggests that the world of the novel is a place in which being called a warrior is a compliment. Warriors know how to fight. They know how to carry themselves on the battlefield. The idea that humans are fighting for their survival, holding off the enemy however they can, is a dominant motif throughout War and Peace, and one that Tolstoy examines from several angles. While the author is arguable... skipped it. While the author never approves of extreme tactics such as the cold-blooded ruthlessness of Helene Karagina, it is arguable that he views love, and all of life for that matter, as a battlefield upon which some sort of fighting is always necessary. Love is a battlefield. Tolstoy's exploration of war in this novel also raises complicated issues about what it means to identify with one's nation. The threat of a French war against Russia reveals the irony of a cultural situation in which, even in peacetime, the French-speaking Russian aristocrats always do that. They're aristocrats, not aristocrats. This is not an animated movie. Let me try reading the sentence again. The threat of a French war against Russia reveals the irony of a cultural situation in which, even in peacetime, the French-speaking Russian aristocrats already seem at war with the common native Russian-speaking population. It's like the enemy within kind of thing. And their affluence has given them cultural fluency. In a way, it's like, we're rich, and we can speak more than one language. Ha 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 ha. The division among nations during the Napoleonic Wars also points to a division within Russia itself, even before the war begins. We hear, for example, that Hippolyte Kurgan speaks Russian like a foreigner. We wonder what the war against France might mean to this Russian who speaks only French. The cultural divide within the Russian nation in peacetime could perhaps simply become more noticeable in wartime, making the Napoleonic War an internal as well as external threat. It's kind of like Russia's like a ship in a way, and they want to like patch up all of the holes in the hull before they sail out into the seas of the Napoleonic Wars, so that way they won't sink. What's strange is that book 2 and 3 says chapters 1 through 5. But what's strange is that in my copy of the book, War and Peace, it's just, I don't think it denotes book chapters. I see I see only chapter numbers. So, I guess I can just go on to chapter 20. Maybe I can use what's in chapter 20 to use as a reference point for where we're at actually in the book. The card tables were drawn out. Let me take a look at the end of chapter 19 first. It looks like there's another party happening. Maria Dmitrievna, what kind of ice pudding? I don't like ice cream. Carrot ices. No, what kind? Maria Dmitrievna, what kind? She almost screamed. I want to know. Maria Dmitrievna and the Countess burst out laughing, and all the guests joined in. Everyone laughed, not at Maria Dmitrievna's answer, but at the incredible boldness and smartness of this little girl who had dared to treat Maria Dmitrievna in this fashion. Natasha only desisted when she had been told that there would be pineapple ice, before the ice of champagne was served round. The band again struck up. The Count and Countess kissed, and the guests, leaving their seats, went up to congratulate the Countess and reached across the table playing glasses with the Count, with the children, and with one another. Again the footmen rushed out, their chairs scraped, and in the same order in which they had entered, but with redder faces, the guests returned to the drawing room and to the Count's study. So this must have been when Natasha was standing firm to Maria Dmitrievna, which, based in this Spargnos recap of War and Peace, was about halfway through book 1. Where was that? I think it was... Yeah, it's kind of strange. It says chapters 14 through 16 here, but it's chapter XX, or 20, in my copy of the book. Alright, let's move on to chapter 20. We'll see if any of the recap that I already did covers any of this material that we're about to head into for chapter 20. The card tables were drawn out. Sets made up for Boston, and the Count's visitors settled themselves. Some in the 2 drawing rooms, some in the sitting room, some in the library. The Count, holding his cards fan-wise, kept himself with difficulty from dropping into his usual after-dinner nap, and laughed at everything. Ha 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 ha. The young people, at the Countess's instigation, gathered round the clavichord and the harp. Instigation, is that a word meaning request? Let me see what the dictionary says. I think that's how it's being used in context. It's the action or process of instigating an action or event. Yeah, I guess in this context it's kind of used like a request. Julie, by general request, played first. After she had played a little air with variations on the harp, she joined the other young ladies in begging Natasha and Nicholas, who were noted for their musical talent, to sing something. O Russia, O Russia, we pledge ourselves to thee. Natasha, who was treated as though she were grown up, was evidently very proud of this, but at the same time felt shy. What shall we sing? She said. The Brook, suggested Nicholas. Well then, let's be quick. Boris, come here, said Natasha. But where's Sonia? She looked around, seeing their friend was not in the room, ran to look for her. Running into Sonia's room and not finding her there, Natasha ran to the nursery. But Sonia was not there either. Natasha concluded that she must be on the chest in the passage. The chest in the passage was the place of mourning for the younger female generation in the Rostov household. And there, in fact, was Sonia lying face downward on nurse's dirty feather bed on the top of the chest, crumpling her gauzy pink dress under her, hiding her face with her slender fingers, and sobbing so convulsively that her bare little shoulders shook. Natasha's face, which had been so radiantly happy all that saint's day, suddenly changed. Her eyes became fixed, and then a shiver passed down her broad neck, and the corners of her mouth drooped. So I think this is when Natasha's going to try to comfort Sonia over her consternation about, if I recall, Andrew serving in the army. I think it's either Andrew or Nicholas. Yeah, no, hard for me to remember. Sonia, what is it? What's the matter? Ooh, ooh, ooh. And Natasha's large mouth widened, making her look quite ugly. She began to wail like a baby without knowing why. Except that Sonia was crying. Sonia tried to lift her head to answer, but could not, to hide her face still deeper in the bed. Natasha wept, sitting on the blue-striped feather bed and hugging her friend. With an effort, Sonia sat up and began wiping her eyes and explaining. Nicholas is going away in a week's time. Okay, yeah, it was Nicholas. His papers have come. He told me himself, but still I should not cry. And she showed a paper she held in her hand with the verses Nicholas had written. Still I should not cry, but you can't. No one can understand what a soul he has. And she began to cry again because he had such a noble soul. It's all very well for you. I'm not envious. I love you and Boris also. She went on, gaining a little strength. He is nice. There are no difficulties in your way. But Nicholas is my cousin. One would have to the Metropolitan himself. And even then it can't be done. And besides, if she tells Mama, Sonia looked upon the Countess as her mother and called her so, that I am spoiling Nicholas's career and I am heartless and ungrateful, while truly, God is my witness. And she made the sign of the cross. I love her so much, and all of you, only Vera. And what for? What have I done to her? I'm so grateful to you that I would willingly sacrifice everything, only I have nothing. Sonia could not continue, and again hid her face in her hands and in the feather bed. Natasha began consoling her, but her face showed that she understood all the gravity of her friend's trouble. Sonia, she suddenly exclaimed, as if she had guessed the true reason for her friend's sorrow. I'm sure Vera has said something to you since dinner, hasn't she? Yes, these verses Nicholas wrote himself, and I copied some others. And she found them on my table and said she'd show them to Mama. And that I was ungrateful, and that Mama would never allow him to marry me. But that he'll marry Julie. You see how he's been with her all day. Natasha, what have I done to deserve it? And again she began to sob more bitterly than before. Natasha lifted her up, hugged her, and smiling through her tears, began comforting her. Sonia, don't believe her, darling. Don't believe her. Do you remember how we and Nicholas, all three of us, talked in the sitting room after supper? Why, we settled how everything was to be. I don't quite remember how, but don't you remember that it could all be arranged and how nice it all was? There's Uncle Shinshin's brother has married his first cousin. Cousins kissing cousins, yo. And we're only second cousins, you know. Boris says it's quite possible. You know, I've told him about it, and he's so clever and so good, said Natasha. Don't you cry, Sonia, dear love, darling Sonia. And she kissed her and laughed. Vera's spiteful, never mind her. And all will come right and she won't say anything to Mama. Nicholas will tell her himself, and he doesn't care at all for Julie. Natasha kissed her on her hair. Sonia sat up. The little kitten brightened, its eyes shone, and it seemed ready to lift its tail, jumped down on its soft paws, and began playing with the ball, roosted as a kitten should. Do you think so? Really? Truly? She said, quickly smoothing her frock and hair. Really, truly, answered Natasha, pushing in a crisp lock that had strayed from under her friend's plaits. Both laughed. Let's go and sing the brook. Come along. Do you know that Fat Pierre, who sat opposite me, is so funny? Said Natasha, stopping suddenly. I feel so happy. And she set off at a run along the passage. Sonia, shaking off some down which clung to her and tucking away the verses in the bosom of her dress, close to her bony little chest, ran after Natasha down the passage into the sitting room with flushed face and light, joyous steps. At the visitor's request, the young people sang the quartet, The Brook, with which everyone was delighted. Then Nicholas sang the song that he just learned. At night time in the moon's fair glow, how sweet as fancy wanders free, to feel in this world there's one who still is thinking but of thee. But while her fingers touch the heart, wafting sweet music over the lea. Must be an old word. It is for thee thus swells her heart, sighing its message out to thee. A day or two then bliss unspoilt, but oh, till then I cannot live. He had not finished the last verse before the young people began to get ready to dance in the large hall, and the sound of the feet and the coughing of the musicians were heard from the gallery. Pierre was sitting in the drawing room where Shinshin had engaged him, as a man recently returned from abroad, in a political conversation in which several others joined, but which bored Pierre. When the music began, Natasha came in and walked straight up to Pierre and said, laughing and blushing, "Mama told me to ask you to join the dancers." "I'm afraid of mixing the figures," Pierre replied, "but if you'll be my teacher," and lowering his big arm, he offered it to the slender little girl. While the couples were arranging themselves and the musicians tuning up, Pierre sat down with his little partner. Natasha was perfectly happy. She was dancing with a grown-up man, who had been abroad. She was sitting in a conspicuous place and talking to him like a grown-up lady. She had a fan in her hand, and one of those ladies had given her a hold. Assuming quite the pose of a society woman. Heaven knows when and where she had learned it. Excuse me. She talked with her partner, fanning herself and smiling over the fan. "Dear, dear, just look at her," exclaimed the Countess as she crossed the ballroom, pointing to Natasha. Natasha blushed and laughed. "Well, really, Mama, why should you? What is there to be surprised at?" In the midst of the third ekosais, there was clatter of chairs being pushed back in a sitting room where the Count and Maria Dmitrievna had been playing cards with the majority of the more distinguished and older visitors. Ekosais is pronounced ekosaz, and it's an energetic country dance. Maybe I can find an example. Yeah, forget about it. Maybe I can find an image that represents the dance. People dancing in lines. I guess it's kind of like a like, what is it? Like ballroom dance or something like that. Yeah, like a waltz. I have to use the bathroom. Be right back. It's a long chapter, you all. So hold on tight. Okay. Yeah, long chapter. They now, stretching themselves after sitting for so long, replaced their purses and pocketbooks, entered the ballroom. First came Maria Dmitrievna and the Count, both with merry countenances. The Count, with playful ceremony somewhat in ballet style, offered his bent arm to Maria Dmitrievna. Which count is this? I assume it's Count Rostov, because Count Bezukov I think has already passed away. He drew himself up and a smile of debonair gallantry lit up his face, and as soon as the last figure of the écossaise was ended, he clapped his hands to the musicians and shouted up to the gallery, addressing the first violin. Simon, do you know the Daniel Cooper? This was the Count's favorite dance, which he had danced in his youth. Strictly speaking, Daniel Cooper was one figure of the Anglaise. Look at Papa, shouted Natasha to the whole company. Quite forgetting that she was dancing with a grown-up partner, she bent her curly head to her knees and made the whole room ring with her laughter. Okay, she must have a pretty powerful voice then. Indeed, everybody in the room looked with a smile of pleasure at the jovial old gentleman, who, standing beside his tall and stout partner, Maria Dmitrievna, curved his arms, beat time, straightened his shoulders, turned out his toes, tapped gently with his foot, and by a smile that broadened his round face more and more, prepared the onlookers for what was to follow. As soon as the provocatively gay strains of Daniel Cooper, somewhat resembling those of a merry peasant dance, began to sound, all the doorways of the ballroom were suddenly filled with domestic serfs, the men on one side and the women on the other, who with beaming faces had come to see the master making merry. Just look at the master, a regular eagle he is, loudly remarked the nurse, as she stood in one of the doorways. The Count danced well and knew it, but his partner could not and did not want to dance well. Her enormous figure stood erect, her powerful arms hanging down. She had handed her reticule to the Countess, and only her stern but handsome face really joined in the dance. What was expressed by the whole of the Count's plump figure and Maria Dmitrievna found expression only in her more and more beaming face and quivering nose. But if the Count, getting more and more into the swing of it, charmed the spectators by the unexpectedness of his adroit maneuvers and the agility with which he capered about on his light feet, Maria Dmitrievna produced no less impression by slight exertions, the least effort to move her shoulders or bend her arms when turning or stamp her foot, which everyone appreciated in view of her size and habitual severity. The dance grew livelier and livelier. The other couples could not attract a moment's attention to their own evolutions and did not even try to do so. All were watching the Count and Maria Dmitrievna. All eyes on them. Natasha kept pulling everyone by sleeve or dress, urging them to look. Look at Papa. Though, as it was, they never took their eyes off the couple. In the intervals of the dance, the Count, breathing deeply, waved and shouted to the musicians to play faster. Faster, faster, faster. Dang, I can't do it that fast. But I know someone who can. Lightly, more lightly, and yet more lightly whirled the Count, flying around Maria Dmitrievna, now on his toes, now on his heels, until turning his partner around to her seat, he executed the final pass, raising his soft foot backwards, bowing his perspiring head, smiling and making a wide sweep with his arm amid a thunder of applause and laughter led by Natasha. Both partners stood still, breathing heavily and wiping their faces with their cambric handkerchiefs. That's how we used to dance in our time, ma chérie, said the Count. That was the Daniel Cooper, exclaimed Maria Dmitrievna, tucking up her sleeves and puffing heavily. All right, and that is chapter 20. Let's see if we can listen to the song in écossaise. This is Beethoven's écossaise in G major. Okay, hold on a minute. And with this, I'll end the stream today. That's a lot of reading.
Boom, baby. What's up, Pepe Lappers, dumb motherfuckers?
Train. Alright, let's try again. Wow. Very well done, Beethoven. Very well done. I think that is about what the song sounded like that they were dancing to. Sounded. Alright, thank you for watching. Have a nice night. Stomach Show signing up.